Hello and welcome to Lichen Loam. My name is Katie. My pronouns are they, them, and I've chosen a spectacularly sunny day again to come and sit myself by a mushroom and moss and lichen covered log and tell you about what I've been working on. Once again, I'm worried that I will give you the impression that the weather is always like this in Cymru, South Wales, where I live, in Bannau National Park. However, it is not. And when I set out this morning, there was a heavy mist in the air. I was under a cloud inversion, which is when the cold air gets trapped in the valleys, underneath a layer of warm air above. And it's incredible when you're in the mountains. You can see the mist all hanging in the valleys and a clear sky above. It was beautiful, but now as the sun has come up, the mist has cleared and I'm left with a beautiful sunny day to sit out here and tell you what I've been working on. I wanted to bring you into the studio to chat about my progress on the cover for the Lichen Fancier knitting pattern. I feel like I'm very much at a stage that's very similar to the stage I was when I was working on my green bean zine when I first started the Green Bean podcast. That's a lot of green beans. Which was tentatively returning to work after a break, which I now understand was an autistic burnout, and really trying to pace myself and work at a speed that's possible and sustainable for me without regard for deadlines or even timelines for the work. I'm just enjoying the process and letting it take as long as it takes. I mean, this pattern has already taken me the best part of 3 years, so why not just let it take even longer? It doesn't really matter. I know that there are folks who are excited about it and waiting for the knitting pattern, but it's much better if I work at a pace that's manageable for me and produce the pattern of good quality that I'm happy with, rather than rush to try and get it out. Maybe that compromises the quality of the pattern and the artwork, and it compromises my health, so nobody wins in that situation. I'm just taking things really slowly. And since I last saw you, there's probably been loads of progress on this. So I have made some progress on the front cover, and I've revealed a blank piece of cardboard. There's also progress on the back cover. I decided that what I really wanted to do was have the back cover be a reverse. So I'm going to explain how I made this happen. I've done a lot of work on all of the drawing for these trees and lichens, and I didn't want to redo it for the back cover. So I'm going to mostly invert it digitally after I finish the colouring. But I needed to do a bit of drawing for the back of my head, and I wanted to place it so the trees look like they're in front of me, so that it changes the images slightly but not completely. And the way that I did that was scan in the line work for the front cover, printed it out on a piece of paper, and then held it up to my window to make a tracing on the same piece of paper, so on the back of the printout. And then once I'd traced it in pencil, I flipped the paper over, laid that on a blank sheet of paper, and then scribbled over, just in pencil again, and the weight of that, the pressure of that scribbling, transfers an outline of the drawing onto the paper. So that's a really useful tip that I use often, because this watercolour paper that I'm working on, it's very heavy. It's fixed to a block actually, so that makes it even thicker. But just a single sheet, it's far too thick to use with a light box, so I needed to trace the drawing onto it. And as you can see, I've only done my body and a little bit of the tree. The rest will be added digitally from this drawing. I think when I last spoke to you about this project, I was still working on the inking, which is the black outlines of the drawing. And I was talking about the problems I'd had with the self-portrait illustration I was working on, where my inks were not working as I expected on the paper. It was kind of sucking the colours in, not creating the effects that I wanted. And I found the same is true with this drawing. I did a couple of test pieces and realised that I wasn't going to be able to colour it with inks in the way that I usually do, the way that I wanted to. So I had to make an alternative plan, and the alternative plan that I chose was coloured pencil. It's a dry medium, so I don't need to worry about how that colour absorbs into the paper. And even though it's not my first choice, it's a medium that I really enjoy working with. It's very controlled and precise, and I'm really enjoying the process of doing something different. It's quite meditative. It kind of reminds me of being a kid and colouring in, which is essentially what I'm doing on this project now, a very slow and meticulous process of colouring in. The way that I really like to work with coloured pencils is layering up the colours. So rather than just choosing one colour that I want to use for the glasses, for example, one colour for my skin tone, I like to layer up different shades together. It creates a subtlety of colour. It's not just using the colour that's out the box, but, you know, building up not just a unique colour, but it helps you create the shadows and lights and areas of different tone. It's really satisfying to do, and when you've got good quality coloured pencils like the ones I'm using, these are Prismacolor, the colours blend together really nicely. It creates a really nice soft effect that I find really soothing and comforting to work on. friends. Okay, I think I found the perfect spot to sit and tell you about what I've been knitting. I have obviously finished a project since I last saw you. If I take it off, I can show you. This is my Madara shawl by Inese Sang, and I talked about it quite a lot in the previous episode, and I've been wearing it a lot since the previous episode, so much that actually the edge is starting to curl and it could do with another block. But I have also been thinking, because the edge has that tendency to curl, I might just unpick the bind off, because it has, from the end of these bobbles here, it has just stocking stitch until you cast off, and of course stocking stitch tends to roll up at the edge, so the shawl, after a few days after blocking, it does tend to curl up. So I have been thinking I might refinish the edge with a few rows of garter stitch before casting off. Thankfully I have lots of the main colour of yarn left over. We'll see whether or not I get around to doing that. This was such a slog of a project, one that I started before my break and came back to and finished. And I think I can be honest and say I didn't really enjoy the process of knitting it. But I am pleased with the result. The colours, as you can see, are perfect for me and my surroundings, and the shawl is nice and light, and I'm getting lots and lots of wear out of it walking. But yeah, the process wasn't my favourite because of lots of complicated techniques. It wasn't very relaxing knitting, so there were obviously long rows. It's massive, it's more than a metre long, but rows with colourwork, and colourwork on both the right side and the wrong side, knit and purl in the same row, and these bobbles as well, which gave me 100 million ends to weave in. So it feels like a victory to have finished this project and have it in use. I'm very, very pleased with it. The yarns that I used, the main colour is from Zakami Yarns. It's their BFL and Massam blend, and the contrasting colour is from Gull Rock Fibres. It's a naturally dyed, it's a DK, so I used a 4-ply as the main colour and a DK as the contrasting colour. That was an accident, I didn't notice, but I think actually it just adds to the textured nature of the shawl, so I think it's fine. And the Gull Rock Fibres is the same fibre blend, so it's a DK, but it's still Blue-Faced Leicester and Massam, so the two yarns worked really well together, and I'm really pleased with the finished shawl. Since finishing that shawl project, I have cast on a new garment, and I chatted about it on Patreon, but I've since put it down. And I know I talked a lot in my last video about becoming a one project at a time knitter, and I'm not sure how putting a project down and starting another fits into that. We'll see how it goes. But since I picked up a new project, and I'll explain why I did, I have not touched the garment project, so I'll talk about that when I come back to it, hopefully in the future. But the project I have cast on is a little pair of colourwork mittens, and the reason I cast them on is because they're a gift. They're for my mum, whose 80th birthday is next week. This is the first mitten, well, actually it's the second mitten, but it's still sort of the first mitten. I'll explain. I'm obviously not going to finish them on time, but I am going to see my mum quite soon after her birthday, so I will be able to give them to her in person, and hopefully the handmaidenness of the gift will make up for the fact that they're not going to arrive on time. The reason this is the second mitten is because I knitted almost the whole of a first mitten before deciding that I wasn't happy with the colours that I'd chosen. And, well, I was happy with the colours that I'd chosen. I wasn't happy with how they were playing in the colourwork pattern. I found up to this point it looked okay. This is not a gradient yarn, by the way. This is a 6 different colours of yarn that I was splicing together to create a gradient. So you can see it clearly in the cuff, going from purple to blue to green and then back again. And then I was doing the same gradient, purple to blue to green, and then going to go back again at the tip of the mitten. However, once I put the green in, which is a really kind of bright pop, because I was doing equal numbers of rows of each colour, I felt like the green was just too dominant, and you probably can't even tell that this is a butterfly motif emerging here. I felt like the stripes of colours overtook the motif. They felt they were stronger, and you know, this is a pair of butterfly mittens for my mum who loves butterflies. I wanted that to be the most striking element. And sometimes when you've got this far with a project, especially if you're knitting for a deadline and it's a gift, the temptation is just to forge ahead and finish anyway and then not be happy with it. But I feel like I've learned at this point in my knitting that some element of perfectionism is helpful, and as soon as I realised I wasn't happy with the colours, I put it down and started the next one. You'll notice I didn't frog it. That's partly because I wanted to show you, to talk about the decisions that I've made, but also I find when I decide to start a project over again, the best thing to do is start the project over again and then frog the other bit later when I need more yarn, rather than frog it first. If I get everything off the needles and start from scratch, I find that's a bit of an obstacle to getting the project finished. You might also notice that this new mitten is smaller than the previous one. My mum has quite small hands, similar to me, so I went down a needle size. So essentially, this mitten was a swatch. I don't tend to swatch for small projects because, you know, the mitten is the same size as a swatch. So I learned lots of important lessons from this, and now I'm taking them forward into this final version, which I'm really, really happy with. And I'm just about to begin the butterfly motif. I'm knitting my colourwork inside out, as I always do, because I find that it really helps with keeping the tension on working projects with a small circumference, so socks or mittens or even sleeves. People often ask me what on earth I mean when I say knitting inside out. Doesn't that make it more difficult? No, it doesn't, although it does sound complicated. It's not as terrifying as it sounds. So if I pause, I can show you what I mean. You can see that I've got the right side of my work facing me as I'm working. If I just move the needles so that things don't drop off the end while I'm working, I can just flip the mitten inside out. So if I was working normally, not inside out, I would be knitting along my row here, this way, knit, knit, knit. So working inside out is exactly the same. I'm not doing anything different other than I've got this bit of my work in front of me rather than at the back if I had it the right way out. So it doesn't change anything with how I read the chart or how I work with my hands. It just means that I've got a little bit more room when, especially working in the magic loop, or maybe if you work double pointed needles, when you go around the corner where your work joins, it gives the floats a little bit more distance to travel. Often that area can end up being really tight if you work right side out. So I find that working inside out just helps keep the tension even around those corners. The other thing that's perhaps unusual about the way that I work stranded colourwork is holding both of the yarns in my left hand. I'm a continental knitter, so I like to carry the yarn in my left, and I tend to wrap the contrasting colour around my little finger, the main colour around my ring finger, and then tension them both over my index finger so that when I'm working I can just easily pick up the colour that I need. The pattern I'm using for this project is the Flutter Butterfly mittens by Mimi Cod, and you'll notice several modifications that I've made. The pattern has a big butterfly motif for the palm of the hand and a motif of small butterflies on the back of the hand, which I didn't like as much as the graphic crisscross in the background of the design, which is what you see here. So I decided to work that on both sides of the mitten and just have a butterfly motif, and I'm going to make them opposites so my mum can decide whether the butterflies go in the palm of the hand or the back of the hand where she can see them, which I think is probably what she'll choose, but at least she'll have the option. And the other modification I made is just this cast on in the contrast colour, which is a technique that I have also used in my Lichen Fancier cardigan. It's one that I really like. I think it goes really nicely. It brings out the colour work, so I'm pleased with how that looks. The yarns that I'm using are a natural undyed black. This is Ram Jam from Daughter of a Shepherd, one of my all-time favourite yarns. I think it might even be my desert island yarn, although that's difficult because it only comes in undyed colours, so I wouldn't have any green, which would be perhaps a bit distressing. But yeah, certainly in terms of texture and robustness, I love how this yarn wears. It's warm and comfortable but light because it's woolen spun, one of my absolute favourites, so really happy to be using it in these mittens. And the contrast colour is something I pulled out from my stash. This is a mill special from John Arbon Textiles. It didn't have a name. It was from one of the very earliest mill open weekends that I went to. And I had a garment quantity of this yarn, and way back in ages past, I actually knitted an entire cardigan out of this yarn. It didn't fit super well. I found it a little bit tight, so eventually I frogged it, washed it, put the yarn back in my stash, and now it's the perfect colour to use in these mittens for my mum, who really likes light blue. So I'm pleased that this yarn is finally getting a use. And speaking of yarns from projects of old, these gradient of colours that I used in the first mitten as well also come from an old project, but not one that I frogged. They came from my Scatness tunic by Kate Davies, which is one of the earliest projects that I made, the first project that I steeked. And I really love the colours. I didn't wear the garment very much. My tastes have changed over the years, but my mum really, really loved it. So I ended up giving the garment to her. Hello, I've got a robin who's come over to see what I'm chatting about, and they're very loud. Hi, I'm sorry, I'm hanging out under your tree. I hope that's okay. Is it? Thank you. Where was I? Yes, I was talking about my Scatness tunic by Kate Davies, which I gave to my mum, which is what inspired me to pick these colours to use in the mittens, because I thought they would match with the tunic. Turns out that wasn't the right decision, but yeah, all of the yarns that I'm using in these projects have a history, which I really like. I love that about knitting. It's one of the few crafts where our materials are not permanently changed by the process of working with them, so we get to make a thing, enjoy the thing, and then if we stop enjoying it, take it apart and turn it into something else. It's magic, and I love it. I wasn't sure I'd find much to include for a fungus report in this episode, but if you know where to look and look closely, there's still plenty of fungi around to be seen in January. I've seen lots of kind of curly bracket fungi, turkey tails, and I just spotted this kind of jelly-like oozy thing poking out of this log, something I've never seen before, which is very cool. However, I still don't think there's enough to do a full mushroom report, so in this episode I'm going to do a lichen report instead. If you look very closely at the cladonia lichen growing on this stump, cladonia are the lichen that include the pixie cups, the kind that grow little stalks. It's a adjective as well as a classification of how the lichens grow, and I love the ones that grow the bright red tips, which amongst a winter wood like this where there's no leaves on the trees, no flowers, no mushrooms, not very many mushrooms to speak of, it's really amazing to see that pop of really, really bright colour. You find them on rocks, amongst mosses, and on dead wood as well. Winter is such a great time of year to see treetop lichens, ones you wouldn't normally see when you're walking, because storms, strong winds, lots of weather can bring branches down, and even though it's sad that the lichens make their way onto the ground, it gives you a chance to observe them up close and realise how much life there is growing at the top of the trees that we don't normally get to see. The thing I love about being interested in lichens is they are absolutely everywhere. Once you start looking for them, you realise that they are everywhere in rural environments like this, but also in cities, on houses. There's even some growing on my car. The more you look, the more you find them. Obviously, being somewhere like this, there are an absolute incredible wealth of lichens to look at. And there's an absolute forest of them growing on this dead tree stump. I think it's an oak based on the other trees that are around me. And there's a whole world. I love getting a magnifying glass or a hand lens and really getting my face right in there. And the more you look, the more there are to see, which is just something that thrills me as somebody who is obsessed with tiny details. It is like a tiny forest, and there's probably a whole world of creatures and microbes living in and amongst them, living out their lives on a whole different scale of perspective than the world that we see day to day at human size. It's something that I get really excited about, obviously. You can probably tell. If I wasn't quite cold, I could probably sit here for hours, absolutely just losing myself in staring at all of these lichens. I just found loads more of my little red friends down here. Lichens are notoriously difficult to identify, not just because they are, frankly, quite queer. They don't subscribe to our definition of species because they are not species. They are a symbiosis of fungi and algae living together. And when you think about it, fungi and algae are plants. They are different branches of the tree of life that diverged in evolutionary terms long ago. So the fact that they've created this community that comes together and creates what looks to us like an individual organism, like a plant or a mushroom, is kind of mind-blowing to me, and I love that. And from what I understand, which isn't loads, I'm not an expert on lichens by any means, is that the more scientists study them, the more they discover that there are other species taking part in this symbiosis as well, yeasts, and two organisms working together is kind of the minimum, and there might even be more. So yeah, it gets me really, really excited. But I'm saying this because learning the names of lichens is difficult. I can't look at this and tell you exactly what species it is. And I don't mind that, because I feel like learning the names of things is only one way of gathering knowledge about things. There's so many other different ways. The names are great and they're helpful. They help you look up things in books and help you find out about them. But not knowing the names doesn't mean that you're not doing a good job of observing the lichens, appreciating them, learning about them. You know, I can learn from looking, from noticing, oh, I've seen one similar to this in a habitat on Dartmoor. I wonder what that's got in common. There are just lots of different ways of learning and appreciating them. The more I've looked at the bark of this ancient oak, which is so thick and rumpled, and it's created all these kind of different micro-habitats, the more I realise that every single surface and crevice is absolutely covered in lichen. And it's just unbelievable. The more you look, the more you see. Every surface has got some kind of coloured lichen, and I'm imagining that the different ways that the crevice faces, whether it gets more sun or more moisture, kind of affects which lichens are able to survive there. It's extraordinary. Part of me wishes that it was possible for me to learn all of the names and species of all the different lichens that were here. But what I understand is you need a microscope to be able to identify them, and obviously to do that I would need to scrape them off and take them away. Really, what I love about it is just being able to see the extraordinary diversity living just on one tree trunk, on one tree in this vast place. Has so much life. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Lichen Loam. It's been really helpful for me to just pick up my tripod and my microphones and get outside and record something for you. I'm very grateful that the weather was so kind to me. I wasn't really expecting it to be this nice. It's been really, really lovely. I've had a bit of a slow, slightly challenging start to January. I don't think it's anything to worry about. I think it's just going with the rhythms of January. I don't always feel ready for all the excitement and newness that we're supposed to feel after New Year. I wrote about this at length in my most recent newsletter, that New Year feels like it belongs more in March, when spring is here and life is coming back to places like this, to the woods and the mountains. January feels more like a time to be quiet and be still. And I always feel like that's a bit at odds with all the messages of New Year and New You, and you're supposed to suddenly find the energy in these dark, short days to be able to do loads of things. That doesn't really work for me. So I've been taking things fairly slowly, but it has been really nice to be out in the sunshine today, sharing what I've been working on and making this video for you. So I hope that you've enjoyed spending some time out here with me and the birds and the trees and the mosses and the lichens in this beautiful place that I very fortunately get to call home. If you want to hear from me between now and the next time, Patreon is the place to do so. You can join for free and get access to my newsletters, and if you decide to start a paid membership, then you also get access to extra videos, including my regular, slightly more informal diary videos that I've been recording, and they contain kind of behind the scenes, a bit more of an insight into my day-to-day creative work. So I'll pop the link for that down below. And until next time, I hope that you're enjoying whatever creative projects you're working on. And thanks for being here to spend some time with me. Bye.